Sophie Cunningham checked into the game with 3 minutes and 56 seconds left on the clock. The Indiana Fever clinging to a lead that Connecticut had been chipping at all night, and over the next 236 seconds, she scored 11 straight points for her team and turned a nervy road game into a final score that nobody in that building was arguing with. 3 threes, a drive, a finishing dagger with 23 seconds left that made the building go quiet in that specific way. Buildings go quiet when the home crowd already knows what's coming. Indiana won 85-75.
Clark lunges and answers with a three.
On paper, that's a comfortable 10-point road win, the kind of result that barely makes a dent in a league full of close finishes and overtime thrillers. But if you only look at that final score, you're missing almost everything that actually happened on the floor that night. And you're definitely missing why Sophie Cunningham, scoring 11 straight points against the Connecticut Sun, in that building, on that night, hit differently than just about any other fourth-quarter burst she's had all season. Let me know down in the comments if you think Caitlin Clark deserved that technical foul she picked up late in the game, because the league apparently still isn't sure, and we'll get into exactly why in a minute. Caitlin Clark finished with 25 points on 10 of 17 shooting, went 5 of 10 from 3, and didn't attempt a single free throw the entire night. Not one trip to the line. Against a Connecticut Sun defense that leaned on her physically from tip to horn. Stay with me, because that stat line alone tells you almost nothing about how hard that game actually was, or about the two completely separate storylines that were colliding underneath it the entire time. To understand why Sophie Cunningham's fourth quarter meant what it meant, you have to rewind 5 days, because the road that led to this specific outburst in this specific arena against this specific opponent started with a basketball game in Washington that had nothing to do with Connecticut at all. On June 8th, the Fever were down 2 against the Washington Mystics with 1.2 seconds left on the clock. Sophie Cunningham got the ball, found Caitlin Clark on a long look from distance, and Clark buried it for her first ever game-winning shot in the WNBA. It was the kind of moment that should have been an uncomplicated celebration, the two of them embracing at center court while the rest of the team mobbed them. The exact image a franchise wants circulating online the next morning. Instead, it kicked off one of the stranger subplots of Indiana's season. Almost immediately, speculation started spreading online that the shot Clark and Cunningham actually ran wasn't the shot head coach Stephanie White had drawn up in the huddle, that the two of them had improvised on the fly and gone off script to manufacture the win themselves. Now, plenty of buzzer beaters look improvised even when they're not. That's sort of the nature of a half-second decision under pressure, but the rumor had legs anyway, and it kept growing across fan forums and social media replies for days. Then, 3 days later, Cunningham didn't suit up for Indiana's next game against the Chicago Sky. The team listed her as questionable, then ruled her out entirely with a right elbow injury, her very first missed game of the season. And because the internet does what the internet does, a meaningful chunk of Fever fans connected those two events instantly. Cunningham goes rogue on the game-winning play, and 3 days later, she's mysteriously out of the lineup. To a lot of people watching from home, that didn't look like coincidence. That looked like a coach sending a message. Cunningham didn't let the theory sit unanswered for long. She posted publicly that people were reading way too much into the situation and made clear the game winner against Washington was exactly the play White had drawn up, executed exactly the way it was supposed to be executed. She went further on her own podcast later that week, explaining the whole thing as a miscommunication rather than a rebellion, the kind of small mixed signal that happens inside an NBA or WNBA huddle more often than fans realize, magnified into a controversy because the result happened to be a buzzer beater that went viral. Coach White herself addressed the elbow directly before the Connecticut game, telling reporters the injury had been bothering Cunningham for a while, that the staff had been treating it quietly, and that the team was being cautious with the big picture in mind rather than rushing her back. Whether you buy the miscommunication explanation completely or not, here's the part that actually matters for where this story's going. The elbow was real. It wasn't manufactured to cover for a benching. Indiana won that Chicago game in overtime anyway, 114-106, without her. And 2 days later, on June 13th, Sophie Cunningham was upgraded to available for a road trip to Connecticut. Now here's the detail that turns this from a minor injury subplot into something with real weight behind it. This wasn't just any road trip to Connecticut for Sophie Cunningham. 10 months earlier, in August of 2025, in that exact same arena, against that exact same franchise, Cunningham went down with a knee injury that ended her entire season. A Connecticut player fell into the outside of her leg during the second quarter. She crumpled to the floor in obvious pain. The trainers helped her off, and the team later confirmed she'd torn her MCL and was done for the year. She finished that 2025 season having appeared in 30 games, averaging 8.6 points and 3.5 rebounds, a campaign cut short right as she was finding a real rhythm. So when Cunningham walked back into Mohegan Sun Arena on June 13th, cleared and available after a separate, unrelated elbow scare, she wasn't just returning from a few days off. She was walking back into the building that had taken her season away from her less than a year before. That's not a detail the box score is ever going to show you, and it's exactly the kind of context that makes an 11-point fourth quarter mean more than 11 points. So let's get into what actually happened on the floor that night, because the game Connecticut tried to play against Caitlin Clark deserves its own conversation entirely. Brittney Griner is in her 12th WNBA season, a 10-time All-Star, a 3-time Olympic gold medalist, and the owner of more dunks than anyone in league history by a wide margin. She signed with Connecticut as a free agent over the offseason after a single year in Atlanta, and at 35 years old, she's still the most physically dominant low-post presence most of these younger Sun players have ever shared a locker room with. That experience and that size is exactly why Connecticut leaned on her so heavily against Indiana. At one point in the game, Griner caught Clark with an elbow during a sequence near the basket, and no foul was called on the play at all. Clips of it circulated quickly online, fans and commentators pointing out the contact and comparing it, somewhat pointedly, to the technical foul Clark would pick up later in the same game for considerably less physical contact with anyone. It wasn't an isolated complaint either. Griner has picked up real, on-record physicality calls this season, including a flagrant foul earlier in June. So this wasn't fans inventing a pattern out of nothing. It's a real conversation in the league right now about where the line sits for a center with Griner's size, experience, and physical style of play, especially when the player on the other end of that contact is the most heavily guarded perimeter scorer in the sport. And it showed up in the only stat that really matters when you're talking about a guard getting bodied around a court for 40 minutes. Caitlin Clark did not shoot a single free throw against Connecticut. 0 attempts in 36 minutes of action against a team that fouls as much as anyone in the league. For a player who's drawn contact aggressively at the rim for most of this season, who hit a career-high 15 free throws in a game just a few weeks earlier, and added 14 more in another outing not long after that, an entire night without a single trip to the line against a defense built around physical contact is the kind of statistic that should make you pause. It doesn't automatically mean officiating was the problem. Sometimes a guard has a clean shooting night and simply doesn't need the whistle. But combine the 0 free throws with the uncalled elbow, with Connecticut's defensive identity built specifically around grinding bodies into Indiana's best player, and you start to understand why this particular win felt earned in a way a lot of 10-point road victories don't. Here's what makes it so remarkable, though. Clark didn't need the line. She put up 25 points anyway, going 10 of 17 from the field and 5 of 10 from 3, carving up a defense that had clearly built its entire night around stopping her specifically. With Connecticut clawing back into the game late, Anissa Morrow hit a cutting layup that briefly put the Sun ahead with just over 8 minutes left, the kind of moment where road crowds start to feel a comeback building in real time. Indiana called timeout. Kelsey Mitchell found Clark slightly open at the top of the key, tightly guarded, and Clark drilled the 3 anyway, for a 67-65 lead. Less than 3 minutes later, after Connecticut was whistled for an offensive foul on Griner, Clark caught the ball again, pulled from 32 feet, and buried another 3, pushing the lead to 72-65 with just over 5 minutes to go. That's a player getting bear-hugged and bodied around the perimeter all night, getting nothing from the officials in the way of protection, and answering with the 2 biggest shots of the game anyway. An angry, locked-in Caitlin Clark shooting 59% from the floor is a genuinely worse problem for a defense than a Caitlin Clark standing comfortably at the free throw line. And Connecticut spent the whole night creating exactly that version of her. Then came the technical foul, and this is where the night got genuinely controversial. Clark had been vocal with officials throughout the contest, clearly frustrated by how the game was being called on both ends. And somewhere in the final minutes, with Indiana's lead well in hand, she turned and gestured toward the Connecticut bench in a way the officiating crew read as excessive. The technical was assessed. Connecticut's Kennedy Burke knocked down the resulting free throw, trimming what had briefly been a comfortable cushion down to 74-72 with under 3 minutes to play, suddenly making a game that looked decided feel uncomfortably close again. It was Clark's fourth technical foul of the season, a number that matters because the league's automatic suspension threshold kicks in at 8, putting her exactly halfway there with a long stretch of the schedule still in front of her. Clark didn't dodge the moment afterward. Speaking to reporters post-game, she made clear she wasn't asking anyone to explain the call to her. She already understood exactly why it had been issued, but she didn't back away from the frustration that led to it either. That's not a player rattled by the moment. That's a player who knew precisely what she was doing and decided the trade-off was worth it. National commentators picked the moment apart for days afterward, some framing it as part of a longer pattern of friction between Clark and officials this season, others pointing right back at the uncalled elbow from earlier in the same game as proof the frustration was earned. It's the same debate that's followed Clark for most of this year, every technical getting weighed against every uncalled hit with no real consensus forming on either side. Either way, the technical didn't cost Indiana the win. It just made the final 3 minutes a lot more interesting than they needed to be. While all of that was unfolding around her, Aaliyah Boston was quietly building one of the most complete stat lines of the night, finishing with 13 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 assists, a full double-double with real playmaking on top of it. That last number matters more than it looks like it should, because Boston isn't just setting screens and waiting to be remembered. When Connecticut collapsed extra bodies onto Clark, which they did constantly given everything we just walked through, Boston consistently found the open teammate on the weak side, turning Indiana's offense into something Connecticut simply couldn't load up against without giving something else away. This is the same connection that produced one of the more remarkable stat lines of Indiana's entire season just 2 days earlier, when Clark and Boston became the first pair of teammates in WNBA history to each record a 30-point double-double in the same game, with 8 of Clark's assists going directly to Boston in an overtime win over Chicago. Boston shot the ball efficiently in that game too, going 13 of 26 from the floor after not attempting more than 15 shots in any of Indiana's first 10 games of the season, a sign that the offense has genuinely started running through her in a way it simply wasn't earlier in the year. Clark herself described the chemistry afterward as something close to telepathy at this point, knowing instinctively where Boston is going to be without needing to look for her. Against Connecticut, that same connection showed up in smaller doses all night, Boston grabbing 11 rebounds while still finding shooters. And it's exactly the kind of two-player engine that makes a defense's job miserable, because stopping one half of it just opens up the other. Kelsey Mitchell added 19 points and 5 assists of her own, and her presence on the floor mattered just as much as the numbers suggest. Every time Connecticut tried to throw extra defenders at Clark, Mitchell was right there to make them pay for it. And a defense built around smothering one specific player simply isn't designed to handle a second one, scoring efficiently from multiple spots on the floor. It's the same dynamic that's quietly made Indiana's offense so difficult to game plan against all season. Take away Clark's airspace, and Mitchell punishes you off the catch. Sag off Mitchell to load up on Clark, and you're handing a proven scorer clean looks all night. 3 players combining for that kind of production against a defense built around stopping exactly one of them is the math that eventually breaks a game open. And it's exactly what happened here. Which brings us back to where we started, to Sophie Cunningham checking into the game with under 4 minutes left, and the Fever's lead suddenly looking shakier than it had all night. Connecticut had just cut the margin to 2 points off that technical free throw. The building was getting loud, Connecticut's bench was up and screaming, and Indiana needed somebody, anybody to settle things down before a comfortable road win turned into the kind of late-game collapse that haunts a team for weeks. Cunningham hadn't scored a single point up to that moment. She grabbed an offensive rebound off a missed Connecticut shot, found space, and drilled a three. Then another one immediately after, back-to-back makes for her first points of the night. The kind of sudden burst that makes a broadcast crew sit up in their seats. She drove the lane for a layup that pushed the lead to 82-72. And with 23 seconds left, in the building where her season had ended less than a year earlier, she rose up and buried one more three to put the exclamation point on an 11-3 personal run that closed the door completely. 11 points in 236 seconds, every single one of them coming after Connecticut had clawed its way back into a game that looked finished, in the exact building that had taken her last season away from her. If you're looking for the moment that actually decided this game, it isn't the final buzzer. It's Sophie Cunningham deciding, somewhere in that fourth quarter, that this particular building wasn't going to beat her twice. What made that burst possible says something about why this Fever team is genuinely different from earlier versions of itself. Cunningham doesn't need the ball in her hands constantly to be a threat, which means she and Clark aren't fighting over the same space on the floor. Clark draws the extra bodies, and Cunningham waits patiently in the gaps those bodies leave behind. When she's cold, defenses can live with that calculation, content to live with a contested look from a streaky shooter. When she's hot, the way she was in that fourth quarter, there's genuinely no clean answer, because leaving Clark to chase Cunningham hands Clark an open look, and leaving Cunningham to load up on Clark hands Cunningham a clean three from the corner. Connecticut had no good choice left to make, and Cunningham made sure every wrong choice they did make ended up costing them. Monique Billings rounded out the night with 10 points, doing real work in the paint that gave Indiana's front court a presence Connecticut had to account for instead of simply attacking. Three other Fever starters reached double figures alongside Clark that night, which is exactly the kind of balanced production this team has been chasing all season. That's not a role player surviving the night. That's a front court player making a Connecticut team that wanted to pound the ball inside, think twice about doing it. Step back and look at the bigger picture here, because the final score really is the least interesting number from this game. Indiana improved to 8-5 overall and 4-1 in Commissioner's Cup play, pulling within half a game of the conference lead with the top team set to play for the Cup title at the end of the month. This was Indiana's third straight win, the second time this season they've strung together a streak like that, and it came on the road against a physical opponent, with the officiating clearly tilted in a direction that didn't favor them, and a technical foul threatening to turn a comfortable lead into a nail-biter in the final minutes. They won anyway. Connecticut, meanwhile, fell to 2-13 on the season, their fifth straight loss, dropping to 0-5 in Commissioner's Cup play with the league's worst record by a wide margin. Olivia Nelson-Ododa actually paced the Sun off the bench with 12 points and 7 rebounds. A quietly solid night that got completely buried under everything else that happened, which tells you something about how far Connecticut still has to go this season. For a Sun team that built its entire defensive identity around making life physically miserable for Indiana's best player, the math simply didn't work out. Because you can scheme against one player, you can load up on Clark and hope the whistle stays quiet, but you can't scheme against three players scoring efficiently in three completely different ways on the same night. Caitlin Clark dropped 25 on a defense that never let her near the free throw line. Aaliyah Boston turned in a near-perfect complimentary double-double, the kind of game that's starting to look less like a fluke and more like an actual identity. Kelsey Mitchell made sure Connecticut couldn't load up on anyone without paying for it somewhere else. And Sophie Cunningham, walking back into the exact arena that ended her last season, scored 11 straight points in under 4 minutes to shut the door for good. Connecticut threw their most physical defender, an aggressive scheme, and an officiating crew that wasn't doing Indiana any favors at everything this team had, and the Fever walked out with their third straight win regardless. 3 separate storylines, 3 separate players, 1 final score, and a Connecticut team left searching for answers it still doesn't have heading into its next matchup. So let me know down in the comments below what you think the league should actually do about nights like this one, where the whistle clearly tilts one direction and the player on the other end of it just refuses to let it matter. Do you think Caitlin Clark's technical foul was justified, or was it the byproduct of a night where she'd already absorbed more contact than the box score will ever show? Do you think Sophie Cunningham's return to that building was just a coincidence, or did it feel like exactly the kind of moment she'd circled on her own calendar the second the schedule came out? And if you're as locked in on this Fever team as we are, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this group isn't slowing down anytime soon, and we'll be right here covering every single second of it. We'll see you in the next one.